In 1775, 13 American colonies faced the might of Britain with no professional army, navy, or real experience in war, and a population of just 2.5 million. They risked everything, lives, property, and honor, for independence. What started as protests against taxes escalated into a full-scale revolution that would birth a new nation. Our story starts not with a bang, but with a bill. In 1763, after winning the expensive 7 Years' War against France, Britain faced a mountain of debt. Parliament turned to its 13 colonies and decided they should help pay for a war that had protected them. This led to taxes the colonists found unfair. First came the Stamp Act of 1765 on all printed paper, then the Townshend Acts of 1767 on imports like glass, lead, and tea. For the colonists, it wasn't just about money, it was about principle. Without elected representatives in Parliament, they shouted, "No taxation without representation." Tensions simmered until 1770, when a street clash in Boston led to British troops firing on civilians, killing 5. Later called the Boston Massacre. In 1773, protesters disguised as Native Americans dumped 300 chests of tea into Boston Harbor in defiance, an act known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain retaliated with the intolerable acts, closing Boston Harbor and stripping Massachusetts of self-rule. But the harsh laws united the colonies. In 1774, 12 colonies convened at the First Continental Congress, organizing resistance and sending complaints to King George III. Radical ideas like those in Thomas Paine's Common Sense began spreading, not just for rights, but for full independence. The breaking point came on April 19, 1775. British troops, about 700 strong, marched from Boston to Concord, believing the colonists were hiding weapons. But colonial spies, including Paul Revere, rode ahead to warn the towns. At dawn in Lexington, 77 Minutemen faced the British. A shot rang out. No one knows who fired first, and soon 8 Minutemen lay dead. The war had begun. The British moved on to Concord, where a larger colonial force awaited. At North Bridge, the Minutemen fired on the British, forcing a humiliating retreat back to Boston. Along the 18-mile road, colonial militias ambushed them, and by the time the British returned, they had nearly 300 casualties. Colonial forces then surrounded Boston, trapping the British. The siege included the brutal Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. The British took the fortified position, but suffered over 1,000 casualties, a clear warning that the colonists were a determined fighting force. The siege ended in March 1776, thanks to Colonel Henry Knox, who transported 59 cannons from Fort Ticonderoga over 300 miles. Placing them on Dorchester Heights, General Washington made Boston indefensible for the British, forcing their evacuation and giving the Americans their first major victory. While battles raged, a political revolution was unfolding in Philadelphia. The Second Continental Congress, acting as a temporary national government, took a bold step. On July 4, 1776, they adopted the Declaration of Independence. Written mainly by Thomas Jefferson, it didn't just sever ties with Britain, it declared that all men are created equal, with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A new nation, the United States of America, had been born. But independence on paper was one thing. Winning it was another. The summer and fall of 1776 were disastrous for the fledgling Continental Army under George Washington. The British returned with their largest force ever, landing in New York and crushing Washington's inexperienced army, driving them from Long Island and Manhattan. Forced into a desperate retreat across New Jersey, Washington's army dwindled as soldiers deserted or their enlistments expired. Independence seemed on the brink of collapse. With morale at rock bottom, Washington knew he had to act. On Christmas night, 1776, in a blizzard, he led his exhausted army across the icy Delaware River for a surprise attack. At dawn on December 26th, they struck a garrison of Hessian mercenaries at the Battle of Trenton. Caught completely off guard, the Hessians suffered heavy losses while the Americans had almost none. A week later, Washington scored another bold victory at Princeton. These wins lifted morale and restored faith in his leadership. The real turning point came a year later in upstate New York. British General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada, aiming to cut off New England. But the plan failed. Harassed by colonial militias and stretched thin, Burgoyne's forces were cornered by American troops under General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. After 2 brutal battles, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army at Saratoga. Saratoga was more than a battlefield victory. It was a diplomatic breakthrough. France, eager to avenge its loss in the 7 Years' War, joined as an American ally, providing money, weapons, and a powerful navy. Yet the struggle continued. The winter of 1777-1778 at Valley Forge was brutal. Disease, starvation, and freezing cold killed around 2,000 soldiers without a single shot fired. But under Washington's leadership and the training of Prussian officer Baron von Steuben, the Continental Army emerged in spring stronger, more disciplined, and ready to fight. Frustrated by the stalemate in the north, the British shifted their focus to the southern colonies, hoping to rally loyalists. At first, it worked. In 1780, they captured Charleston, South Carolina, forcing over 5,000 American soldiers to surrender, the worst defeat of the war. But holding the South proved impossible. American commanders like Nathaniel Greene and Daniel Morgan waged a brilliant guerrilla campaign, avoiding large battles and instead wearing down the British bit by bit. At the Battle of Kings Mountain in 1780, frontier fighters destroyed a loyalist force, striking a major blow to British plans. Then, in January 1781, Daniel Morgan scored a tactical masterpiece at the Battle of Cowpens, routing a seasoned British army. These victories shattered British control in the South and pushed General Cornwallis to make a fateful decision: to march his exhausted troops into Virginia. In the fall of 1781, Lord Cornwallis stationed his army at Yorktown, Virginia, believing the port town and the British Navy would keep him secure. But a perfectly timed plan was unfolding against him. George Washington marched his Continental Army south from New York, joined by a large French force. The final piece came at sea. Admiral de Grasse's French fleet defeated the British Navy in Chesapeake Bay, trapping Cornwallis. Surrounded by land and blocked by sea, he had no escape. The siege of Yorktown began. For weeks, American and French artillery battered the British positions. With defenses crumbling and no hope of rescue, Cornwallis surrendered over 7,000 troops on October 19, 1781. As the British laid down their arms, a band reportedly played "The World Turned Upside Down," a fitting soundtrack for an impossible victory. Yorktown was the last major battle, breaking British will to continue the war. The war officially ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. Britain recognized the independence of the United States, whose territory stretched from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. The colonies had become a new nation, ready to forge its future. Which moment of the American Revolution do you find most remarkable? Comment below and subscribe for more history stories.